everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for a very special episode, our 50th episode of the Bookworm. So little round of applause to the amazing Clements development team who has made these happen and created such an extraordinary community for everyone to have fascinating conversations from near and far. As you can tell, I am not Angela. Angela is a little under the weather today, so I'm going to do my best to fill her shoes, which is never totally possible, but I'll do the best I can. If we haven't met yet, my name is Maggie Vanderford, and I'm the librarian for instruction and engagement here at the Clements Library. And I'll be having a fascinating conversation with our guest today, who we'll introduce in just a minute. Before though, we've got a couple little matters of housekeeping. Just first and foremost, important to know that today's meeting is being recorded to share online. So this afternoon, you'll receive an email with the recording and all of the resources that have been mentioned during today's broadcast. Please feel free at any point during the conversation to drop a comment or a question or a thought in the chat. And we will have a Q&A period at the end of the conversation, and it's a little bit easier to keep track of those questions if you can put them in the Q&A bubble that's on the lower right-hand side of your screen, and then we can keep track of all of your questions that way. Anne and Rist will provide information in the chat, and they'll also keep an eye on and monitor the questions for us. If at any time you want to adjust the mode of your screen, there's a little toggle bar separator that you can drag back and forth to change the size of the shared screen, PowerPoint slides, and your view of the speakers. And the live transcription button is also on, so should be automatically enabled, but you can also toggle it on and off using the little closed caption live transcript button if you would like to. So if this is your first Bookworm conversation, there's probably a little helpful context that you might want to know about the Clements. Our mission is to collect, preserve, share, and promote the study and discussion of primary sources related to all aspects of the history and culture of North America and the Caribbean to 1900. We'd also like to acknowledge that the University of Michigan is located on the territory of the Anishinaabe people. In 1817, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations made the largest single land donation to the University of Michigan, offered ceremonially as a gift in the text of the Treaty of the Foot of the Rapids, so that their children could be educated in a Western manner. We acknowledge the history of Native displacement that allowed the University of Michigan to be founded, and we reaffirm the contemporary and ancestral Anishinaabeg ties to this land and their profound contributions to this institution. The William L. Clements Library acknowledges that it has and continues to benefit from the original land dispossession and established hierarchies of settler colonialism. All right, so let's do a little pivot here. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll so we can see everybody's results for the information that they submitted. If you were visited by a tooth fairy, what, if anything, did they leave behind? Looks like for 91% of people, the answer is money. 59 out of the 65 people who contributed received money, but we had a couple treats or gifts. We had a couple books. Nobody got candy. I love the idea of a little note too, and there were a few others. So I haven't been able to pop into the chat yet, but if you're one of the others, I'd be extremely curious to know what those other options were. And if you can move to the next slide, that would be fantastic. So feel free, of course, as we talk throughout, to keep submitting your answers in there, and we'll be talking about the tooth fairy and some other figures related to our teeth over the course of this conversation. Before we get started, I just want to note first and foremost that today's episode of the Bookworm, our very special 50th episode, is generously sponsored by Daniel and Barbara Baalbeck. Thank you so much for your support and for making these conversations possible. I know before even coming to the Clements that having this online community was just such a treasure, and it can't happen without your sponsorship. So thank you very much on behalf of the entire Clements staff, really, for making these opportunities exist. All right, so now get the party started. I'm just absolutely delighted to be joined in conversation today by Tamara Barnes, who is the curator of the Sindecuse Museum of Dentistry at the University of Michigan School of Dentistry. Tammy was previously the assistant director for material culture at the Kalamazoo Valley Museum in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where she managed the exhibit and collections departments. She brings more than 20 years of broad experience in museum management for arts, cultural, and historical societies in Michigan, New Jersey, and New York, among other locations. And today she'll be talking us through some fascinating folklore related to the tooth worm and the tooth fairy, based on some exhibits that the Sindecuse Museum has done. So Tammy, please take it away, and thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you, Maggie, for having me. And I don't know why it didn't click that this is the 50th anniversary episode. So hooray. And I want to I want to reserve the 100th episode as well. I'll come up with another topic. I also just wanted to thank the Baalbecks for sponsoring this episode. I know that they've got strong ties with the dental school, and I've only been here a year, but it's been a really fun and fascinating year. And this topic that we're going to talk about today, I think, will be really interesting and fun for the audience. So I am going to share some slides with everyone, and I want you to bear with me on this. It's going to take me a couple clicks. And then I also want to let everyone know I'm suffering from a head cold, I think, like just about everyone else right now. And so if I go blank for a second, it means I muted and coughed, and I will be back. I've got my water handy. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, nod, Maggie, if you can see that correctly. Awesome.
Looks great.
Okay, so I just want to start off because I know some of you may not be familiar with the Sindecuse Museum of Dentistry. We've actually been around for 30 years. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. Back in 1992, the museum was created through a gift from Gordon Sindecuse, a dentist and graduate of U of M. And if any of you have ties to Western Michigan University, they also donated to the Sindecuse Health Center there. The Museum of Dentistry is one of a handful of museums throughout the world devoted to preserving and exhibiting the history of dentistry. We have a collection of over 25,000 objects focused on the history of dentistry, particularly related to technology in the United States and Michigan, dating from the 18th century to today. This slide shows the exterior of the 1939 Kellogg building, where the museum resides. The museum is made up of a core exhibit titled Into the Dental Office, which traces the history of dentistry from 1860 to 1940. So for all of you dental history enthusiasts, we definitely have something for you. But in addition to that core display, we also do changing exhibits. We've got a large exhibit space in our atrium right now that we just changed out so that we have tooth transformations, modifications for self-expression. That'll be up for 2 years. I really hope you can come see it. And then we also have a number of just smaller satellite displays throughout the dental school. And those smaller satellite displays sort of resulted in this presentation today. Back in 2019, my predecessor installed an exhibit called Tooth Fairy Magic, and it was really popular. It was located just outside of the school's pediatrics clinic. So we were starting to look at sort of the mythical legends associated with dentistry with that exhibit. And then more recently, we installed the Tales of the Terrible Tooth Worm. This was a student choice exhibit where dental and hygiene students were asked to select a topic. We gave them a long list, and this was hands down the winner, which begs the question, why are we interested in the toothworm? And we can definitely get into that. For me, coming here from more of a regional history background, American social history, I have to admit I did not spend a lot of time studying the history of dentistry before coming here. But this topic, the toothworm, was really fascinating to me. So what is a toothworm? And I'd be so curious to know how many of you knew what a toothworm was. Maybe some of you Googled it before you came to this presentation because you just couldn't take the the stress of not knowing a single day longer. But the toothworm is actually pretty significant because it was thought to be the singular cause of tooth decay, toothaches, and even headaches. It was widely accepted all over the world from ancient times and still up to this day in lots of parts of the world. So the toothworm is hugely significant in the history of dentistry. Basically, what we see from ancient times to modern dentistry is a lot of scientists trying to disprove this fact or this non-fact of the toothworm.
And let me jump in here really quickly, Tammy. I just want to ask you a very important question. When I told some of the Clements staff about this talk earlier this week, I think it was sort of universal facial shifts to disgust, shock, and horror. And then Therese, our wonderful friend staff person, said, wait, are toothworms real thing? Like, is the toothworm a real thing? So what are we talking about today? Is there actually a toothworm that you're going to tell us about, or is this sort of a different conversation that we'll be having?
So we're mostly talking about a myth. So when I say worm, I'm going to say we're going to define a worm as something you can see with the naked eye. We all know now that our body is made up of microorganisms and other wriggly things that if you look under a strong microscope, you could make a case that we're made up of a bunch of non-pleasant things. We know there's parasites constantly gnawing at us. But for the purpose of this conversation, we're talking about the mythological toothworm. So in my mind, it never existed, and thankfully it does not exist. It's funny because most of the cures related to the toothworm instructed people to draw that worm out as if the worm had some sort of personality or strong senses of something. So they would either draw out the worm by putting something especially yummy and good outside the mouth that the worm would be attracted to and follow, or they would put something terrible inside the mouth to get the worm to leave because it was so unpleasant in there. And there's some extremely disgusting things that were put in the mouth. The more bitter, the better. There's documentation of mouthwashes that are made of the gastric juices of a pig, which, I think I mentioned when we talked earlier. Not great, but I want all of you to consider the last time you had a really bad toothache, and it can drive you to some pretty crazy things. And I get it. So how is the myth of the toothworm dispelled? Like I said earlier, for hundreds of years, people believed this, but also for hundreds of years, there were scientists trying to disprove this theory. As early as the Islamic Golden Age, which started in the 9th century, Islamic medicine was achieving great advances, which were known across Europe. And we have Hidayat Akawani, depicted here, who wrote a book titled The Learner's Guide to Medicine. And he devoted 2 whole chapters to oral and dental diseases, which that in itself is incredible because for so long, so much of medical history, the mouth was kind of ignored. And he says that dental diseases and treatments should be based on internal anatomical principles. He makes no mention of the toothworm, even though every other medical scientist of this period is exclusively talking about the toothworm. So I just wanted to give a shout out to our Islamic scientist back in the 9th century who was onto something way back then. A few hundred years later, we have some doubt coming from Ambroise Paré. He's known as a barber surgeon, which any of you, if you've looked into anything related to dental history, a lot of people are super interested in this period where dentists and barbers are one and the same, and oftentimes they attribute that to the chair being similar. But it's not just the chair, it's a lot of the tools that they used. And so he was a barber surgeon working mostly in battlefields. And he disagreed with the toothworm theory, mostly because he studied so much about inflammation in the rest of the body, but also in the mouth. And so he really thought that the cause was inflammation, but we still can't prove it. But we've got a guy, saying the toothworm doesn't exist. And then when we start to get into more advanced technologies with microscopes, of course, then we can actually, people are already taking out tubes looking for these worms, and we have people saying that they're seeing worms, and we have people saying they're not. But it's in the 1600s that we meet Antony van Leeuwenhoek, who devises a microscope that consists of a single high-quality lens with a very short focal length. And he observes protozoa and bacteria for the first time ever. And inside the mouth, he observes this, which we think is great because, wow, this is going to, eventually this is what sort of dispels the myth of the toothworm. But back in the 1600s, we're still learning, and he's really examining the process of food decomposition and starts looking under the microscope at cheese. And then he ends up perpetuating the existence of the toothworm because he claims in a letter to the Royal London Society that he took live toothworms from a corrupt tooth, and that they were just like the cheese worms that he found in his specimens. And so even though we make this great step forward, we're kind of going backwards because he claims that he has seen these worms inside of his wife's teeth, and they're just like the cheese worms.
I think that's fascinating, Tammy, that what's supposed to really be kind of this massive scientific advancement instead ends up contributing to this long-standing myth in completely a reverse way. And my dissertation is actually on worms generally, and also what happens to the sort of sociocultural awareness of worms after the microscope discovers all these little squiggling things that we don't have a great analog for other than the body of a worm. And what I find so fascinating is the way in which microscopes really do perpetuate this myth, even far past when you might logically or empirically think that it's true. Riss just dropped a great quote in the chat from one of my favorite treatises on this, which is a 1727 dissertation on worms written by Gerard de Gaulle, which is this sort of long exposition of all of the evidence that he's trying to give to say, the body is actually made up of worms. And here are all the ways that we know this. And one of his great pieces of evidence is that finally we can prove that mouthworms and toothworms are real. And I think this quote is just so evocative. And he says, as he gives his evidence, that worms are bred in the teeth, many have been convinced by feeling arguments, and it is really strange to see how those hard bones are excavated and eaten through by them. And I want to just ask you about that, Tammy, because I think his phrase, feeling arguments, is really meaningful there, that there's been something about the feeling of a cavity or the feeling of tooth pain or a toothache that is close enough to what someone would envision a worm-like movement to be, that people are sort of able to say that they sense it or feel the worms in their mouth in some way. So could you talk about what's actually happening in tooth decay or toothache pain that is this feeling that people are able to sort of concretely envision as worm-like movement?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the main thing is, yes, we're discovering larvae and other worms in the rest of the body, but are they intrinsic, or as we know later, are they being left behind by another being? But getting back to the mouth, just when you think about when you're at the dentist, it's just so interesting because of the placement, your teeth are right next to your ears. And so when you talk about that gnawing feeling, any of us that have had that throbbing pain, you definitely can imagine that there's something in there really gnawing away at you. And it's just this aching. And the other thing is too, it often comes and goes. Even today, I'll notice one day, my teeth are sensitive and the next day they're not. And so it makes you think like, oh, well, the toothworm's in there today doing something, because every time I bite down, it hurts, but tomorrow it might not be. So there's just that nature of how our teeth and that pain is interpreted. And then, again, when you're at the dentist and they're they're doing anything with that tooth, everything is amplified again because it's right in your head. So it's kind of the worst case scenario, but it is really interesting that they make these huge discoveries about microorganisms and larvae and all these things, but fail to see that they're not intrinsic, and that these teeth aren't just coming to you from the inside out, I guess. So finally, in the 18th century, we see some real headway. We've got Pierre Fauchard, who's widely known as the father of modern dentistry, who rejects the theory of the worm in his epic 2-volume work on dentistry that's printed in 1728. And he's also able to use microscopic observations, and he doesn't see any worms. He also correctly, for the first time, puts emphasis on tartar as the cause of tooth decay, and developed a number of techniques to do scaling to remove the buildup on the outside of the teeth. But even though he strongly opposes the tooth worm, he also there's parts in his book where he's like, I've never seen them and I've done a lot of research, but other people have. And so he's got he rejects it, and he's got a somewhat strong stance on it. But there's just so many people during this time that are also, well-renowned scientists that are saying that it exists, that he does kind of fudge on that a bit. So for another 200 years, the tooth worm remains a topic of debate. Every time we get a Fauchard, it seems like there's 2 or 3 more that are saying that they've seen this tooth worm. I've got a list of people you've never heard of: Aligaris, Jacobean, Six, Gabriel Clowder, Philip Salmuth, Nicholas Pechlin, all claim to have seen tooth worms in their research. And another man, Gottfried Schultz, wrote, "Worms of great size can be enticed out of the decayed teeth, some of these even reaching the dimension of an earthworm." So clearly, some of these men are outright lying about their findings. To say that they were able to get an earthworm-sized worm out of a tooth is a bit of a tall tale. And then as the centuries go by, we get Willoughby Miller, who's a German-educated American scientist who comes on the scene in the late 1800s. He's got a famous theory called the acid dissolution. My cold is getting me here. Acid dissolution theory, which debunks the tooth worm once and for all by laying out the exact process for tooth decay, which are food substances, bacteria, and saliva, which combine to form plaque that sticks to your teeth. And then when you add sugar to that mess, you get acids that actually break down the enamel. And we finally find out how tough enamel is. And so the fact that the enamel is so strong that, we find teeth remains thousands of years later. That's also sort of a clue that a worm couldn't just bite away at that. So he discovers this, and it's a major breakthrough. And he's also termed the world's first oral microbiologist. So he's also using microscopes, which you see in that display. We have one of his microscopes because he was the dean here at U of M for a year before he died. But this is really the time when among dentists and medical scientists that it is agreed upon that the tooth worm is a fraud, which is what we put in our exhibit. But the interesting part, as we will get into more in depth, is why did this theory that was debunked over the years, why did it persist all through that time and even after 1890? As we've said, we see it even in the world today. So I've got a couple of reasons that I'll talk about, and then we might open it up. And Maggie, I know you've studied worms in depth, so if you have any other reasons that I don't talk about, feel free to jump in. I think the first, maybe, and most important reason is that the religious text supported the theory. Here's a medieval cure for the tooth worm that was illustrated by Brian Despain for our exhibit. And it says, write an exorcism on the cheek, drip ivy in the opposite cheek, and primrose juice in the nose. And that's just one of dozens of really interesting cures for the tooth worm back in that age. One sec here, I'm gonna move my window. So as early as the 7th century BCE, we have a clay tablet from ancient Babylonia giving an incantation against the tooth worm. And it says, after Adam, the sky god, created the heavens created the earth created rivers created canals created mud, and mud created the worm. The worm went crying before Samas. Its tears flowed before Ea. What have you given for me to eat? What have you given for me to suck? Said Ea, I have given you the ripe fig and the apricot. And the worm says back, what good is that to me, the ripe fig and the apricot? Place me and let me dwell between tooth and gum, so I can suck the tooth's blood and mince upon the gum. And then Lloyd Graham has created this wonderful table comparing this language from that Babylonian tablet to Serbian and Romanian prayers. And so the Romanian and Serbian prayers refer to the Najit, a worm-like demon that invades the head in order to cause toothache and headache. And this is where the creation stories and a lot of the language that we see even in the Bible relating to serpents and these things coming out of the earth when the earth is created. This is where we get the sort of, the toothworm is evil. It's a demon, it's a spirit, and you need to be a good person or you're going to get toothworms. And this is very important to the fact that it has lasted so long. In the 1600s, just to emphasize this point a little more, we have this little ivory tooth. It's about 4 inches high, and it is in the German Museum of Medicine. The little tooth opens up, so you can see the 3 dots there. That's where the pins stick. And on the inside of the tooth, we've got 1/2, and the toothworm is sitting there with a naked woman in its grip, and the woman's hands are raised upwards to the heavens in a plea for help. And then the other half, the souls afflicted by toothache twist in the sea of flames, a representation that immediately reminds the spectator of the iconography of purgatory. So a lot of ties and relationship, excuse me, between the toothworm and our religious texts and beliefs. Another reason that we think the toothworm persisted so long is because of the worm-like characteristics that cavities create. And you see in this photo up on the upper right, it's a round circle. It's got like a tubular tunnel, which very much looks like something a tooth would burrow into. And when Van Leeuwenhoek was looking under the microscope, he was also noticing these tubular structures within the tooth. So he also could use that, in his argument that toothworms existed. And then not only were there these tubular holes in the teeth structurally, and then bigger when you have cavities, but the dentin itself is actually pretty soft. And so dentin was sometimes mistook for the flesh of the worm, which, just imagining someone poking at my dentin and, seeing it, probably extract from pain and thinking it was a worm, sends shivers up my spine. Another reason that the toothworm theory probably persisted for so long was because of something that was a worldwide disease, and that's guinea worms. Water was infected with these guinea worms, which is a parasite that enters the human body and in contaminated drinking water. And it grows for almost a year and then emerges through your skin. So it was a horrible, horrible thing to get. And it was just a widespread disease for so much of human history. A pregnant female guinea worm can release more than 500,000 young worms when it's in water. So anyone seeing those worms in their drinking water, again, just this idea that worms cause everything bad. And then many scholars believe the biblical fiery serpents that attacked the children of Israel in the Old Testament were also actually guinea worms. And then interestingly, you can see in this image, there's someone with a worm and their leg is sticking out there, and there's a person twirling a stick with the worm on it. So the cure for these guinea worms was drawing them out with a stick, which was very painful and actually took several weeks, and oftentimes caused all sorts of other issues. But that was the practice for so long, was to draw the worm out with these sticks, which I did not know until doing research for the exhibit, is where we get these classic symbols of medicine, which we say in the exhibit, it's not actually a snake, it was originally a worm. So there. Let's see. One more reason that the toothworm theory went for so long is that we have these henbane seed treatments, and the henbane treatment for the toothworm exists, again, all over the world for a very long time. But the interesting thing about the henbane treatment, as opposed to the other ones, was that when you cooked this henbane plant, two things happened. First, there was narcotic properties that helped alleviate the pain. But the bigger thing is that when the seeds get heated, they pop and they turn into what looks like on these upper right, in the upper right corner, are larvae. So the seeds actually look like worms. And so oftentimes, quacks would fumigate the mouth with this henbane fog and then open up their hands to show the person, look, here's the worms that we took out of your mouth. And the smoke was inhaled by a person, again, either by fumigation on the left or by having a person sit over the hot seeds. So
that's so interesting, Tammy. And I just want to say too that I think when anyone goes to the dentist, part of sort of the reason why maybe lots of people are afraid of it is you can't see what's going on inside your mouth in the way that you can if you have a blister on your wrist and you can watch what's happening. But when you're in that chair, you're actually really vulnerable. You're lying down and someone's poking around in your mouth and you're trying to feel relief from this pain. So I can really see how it would be comforting for someone to be able to say, aha, here's a physical sign that you have been healed in this way. We've extracted this thing from your body, and it might feel really good to have that material comfort, right? Plus you're drugged up on the henbane seed, which probably helped a little bit. But do you think that there's something about the fact that we can't see what's happening inside our mouths that also fuels this fire in a way?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. You couldn't see the worms, so you'd have to rely on someone else to let you know if they saw worms within your mouth. And so, yeah, how satisfying would it be if you had a toothache and then someone were to show you the worms that they just took out of your mouth? I mean, we don't ask for that at the dentist today to have them show us the cavity, but but now we can see it on screens and we have digital images of what's happening in our mouth. But they also used opium. So there was all sorts of, again, things that if you had enough opium, you wouldn't care if you could see those worms. But yeah, I agree with you. There's so much room for trickery. And there's recorded people in China as late as 1980s in rural China using henbane to treat tooth decays, and even in other parts of the world. So we know that this practice still goes on. And then last but not least, on why this myth persists, most people had no access to any kind of dental care. So they didn't have access to someone who could perform any type of surgery. And they also for surely did not have access to these scientific texts. Most people couldn't read. And so this is just showing kind of the everyday man of medieval times, even up till the 1800s. If you didn't have access to an education or to a dentist, the toothworm actually posed a better alternative for you, because at least there was hope. Like you could try some of these remedies. You could be a good person. I feel like there's more control in having that myth than the actual reality, the alternative, which in a lot of cases is much worse. And so before I jump to the tooth fairy, I wanted everyone just to think about, again, that idea of control. And sometimes myths and folklore can give you a sense of control, because that definitely comes into play with the tooth fairy as well. But also think about why you think this toothworm was the top choice for a School of Dentistry students. And if we have time at the end, we can talk about that. So I do want to move on, though, to the tooth fairy. And it's believed that the tooth fairy may have first come to us from a 17th century French fairy tale by Baroness D'Aulnoy. The story is called The Good Little Mouse, or La Bonne Petite Souris, and it's about a fairy who turns into a mouse to help a queen defeat an evil king. The fairy mouse hides under the king's pillow and takes all his teeth while he sleeps. So very close to what we have today. The next literary reference is almost 200 years later, when a writer named Luis Coloma uses an existing literary character named Raton Perez and a story about a mouse who would regularly run away from home and find his way into bedrooms of children who had just lost their teeth. The story was specifically written for Alfonso XIII, the son of the King of Spain, who had just lost a tooth, and so it was an attempt to sort of cheer him up over his lost tooth. So why a tooth mouse? Why not a tooth frog or a chicken or a bunny? In fact, why not let the Easter Bunny do double duty during his off season? My best guess is that it's because mice were so prevalent in and around the beds of children during a lot of these centuries that we're talking about. In fact, mice have been picking up the wild grains and then farm grains of humans for 6,000 years. So I'm imagining children in these middle-aged homes or during the Middle Ages. And I know that I've encountered my own mice after buying a house in the woods this past summer. And you know what? They're just there, and all you can do is try your best to get rid of them. But it's an ongoing battle. So I think the fact that mice were just so common for much of human history is one of the reasons why. And they also take little things and store them away. So I think that's where the tooth mouse has gotten was popularized. So Raton Perez and the Tooth Fairy, this is just a map showing in modern times where those two stories sort of spread from one another. Most of Europe, United States, Canada, and Australia, we have the Tooth Fairy, where a lot of the Spanish speaking and even French speaking world, they have the tooth mouse. So how do we get the Tooth Fairy from all of this? Starting in the 13th century England, we see the oldest tales of fairies, which were considered, a lot of them were considered guardian fairies. And then that belief in fairies became widely accepted across Europe. Most people didn't refer to them as fairies at that time. They were just called little people or hidden people. And they were sort of feared and loved at the same time. Some people thought they were like ghosts or spirits of the dead. And there are hundreds of different kinds of fairies, some good, some bad. But the one thing that all fairies had in common is that they could appear and disappear at will. So we have big popularity of fairies across Europe, combining with the tales of the fairy mouse for the Tooth Fairy. And the first time that we see a printed reference to the Tooth Fairy in the United States is in a 3-act play written in 1927. And it also, this also just underscores the importance of all fairies. So before the Tooth Fairy becomes the Tooth Fairy, we have a lot of fairies. And I'm just going to read a quick excerpt from this. We have Silverwing, who's a new fairy on the scene, and the Queen Fairy says to her, "Welcome to Fairyland, Silverwing. We are so happy to have you with us. And now I suppose I must give you a task to perform. What shall it be, dear fairies? Let me think. She could carry sweet dreams to the little earth babies, or help the lost bumblebees find their way home. Or, oh, I have it. She shall be the Tooth Fairy." And everyone cheers. And Silverwing says, "Why? What is that? How funny." And the Queen explains, "You see, the little earth children believe that whenever one of their teeth comes out, they must always put it under their pillow, and a fairy will come, take it away, and leave a present in its place." So that's one of the first references, which is interesting when we go back to the poll that we took at the beginning, because for so long it was not money. Nobody had money to be given to their kids back then. So they gave little gifts and anything they could find, and it was just meant to be a present. That starts to change, as we'll see. During the
previous slide, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to point out that the sharp contrast in this talk, right? Some of the lines in this page just strike me, Silverwing saying, "Oh, goody, all the fairies say, what fun." You're giving us really the most delightful little character that one could imagine. And that is a pretty big pivot from the sort of horrifying specter of the tooth worm that's kind of going out of fashion at the same time. If the Tooth Fairy is appearing in America in 1927, but the Tooth Fairy is coming onto the scene. So I just wondered if you could maybe clarify how you see the connection between these two characters taking shape at this kind of pivotal moment in history, and also Why do we need these figures so badly to help us make sense of our mouths? Because in a way, you're giving us a cultural history of how humans have tried to understand and explain what's happening in the human body and create stories out of that.
Yeah, it's a real shift from we've got the tooth worm. I mean, the tooth worm is terrifying, but so is losing your tooth when you're a little one. I mean, this your tooth is falling out, and a lot of times it doesn't just fall out; it wiggles and it hurts, and there's blood and it dangles, and I mean, so that's terrifying. But in the case of the tooth worm, we're using a scary mythical creature to scare people into maybe being more righteous or following the word of God, whereas the tooth fairy is more of it's a positive reinforcement of, hey, you're growing up now, and you've got this little fairy that's going to be by your side and sort of look after you. I mean, fairies in general, again, some of them were scary to some people, but in general, they were there sort of looking out for us. And I think just the idea of when you don't understand something, you create something, and it makes you feel more in control. So even as terrifying as the tooth worm, just knowing that, okay, I know what this is, I can fix it. And I'm going to get into a little bit of the parenting with this next slide, sort of the shift in the attitudes towards children. Because in the 1930s, we see the first time a broader interest in developmental psychology for children. This photo is a psychologist administering an intelligence test to a child. And we also see the first research in children's development by conducting detailed normative studies. So this is how we get to where we are today, where every time, a child's born, it's like, oh, it's in the 63rd percentile for size, it's in this for this. This is when it first starts. This is during this period. And of course, after World War II, we also see an emergence of the middle class, and they can afford to have a stay-at-home mom who has the time and resources to put into reading about these studies and applying them in their everyday life. So there's a big shift, 20s, 30s, all about science and psychology. And then after World War II, it's sort of indulging your children. So this is really interesting. In 1949, we have Collier's magazine, which is so huge at the time. It's got a readership of 2.5 million. And this again is there was that play that wasn't really widely distributed, but this is the first time the Tooth Fairy is like available to everyone. The story was read by millions of people. And the story is interesting because it talks about the mom, Maud Ross. It says she got the happy news from the doctor. It doesn't even say that she was pregnant. You have to figure that out because they're not allowed to say that back then. So when she heard the happy news, it says Maud went right out and bought some knitting needles, low-heeled shoes, and a copy of Dr. Gintz's authoritative book on modern childcare. And her husband liked to say that in the 20th century, everything from bombs to bubblegum gets scientific handling. So why not the most precious and delicate organisms, the human child? And so these parents are just so scientifically minded on making sure that they're giving vitamins to the kid and hitting all those milestones, and that their kid is absolutely 100% normal compared to the Joneses, let's say. And so finally the girl she's 5, and she comes home with her tooth and says that a girl at school told her that if she puts it under her pillow, the tooth fairy will come. And the parents are aghast. They're like, oh my gosh, what kind of school are we sending you to where they just, let this kind of fairy tale run rampant? And so they explain to her, they think that they're doing a good thing by letting her know, like, you got to have your head in reality. We got to know what's actually happening. And so they give her the bad news that there's no such thing, and that even Santa Claus, and they mention some other, it's awful actually, them explaining to her the reality of life. Anyway, she puts the tooth under her pillow anyway, and they give her money anyway, which is actually a perfect reflection of what is happening in the 1940s, because we see yet another shift with the emergence of the Common Sense Book of Baby and Child Care by Benjamin Spock. So that came out in 1946, and we go from this big extreme of, we've got to do everything by the book, and there's just so much at stake, and you've got to do everything right, to him saying basically, hey parents, do what you're comfortable with. If you feel like you want to comfort your child, if you want to, splurge on something, he encouraged parents to be more flexible and affectionate with their children. And so he gave them permission basically to do things like the tooth fairy. And then we just, everything just sort of explodes with childhood. And we see all sorts of Disney movies coming out that are, again, for the first time, these major motion pictures that are devoted towards children, but also showing fairies and how they can protect you. So we've got Cinderella, which you may remember has the 3 mice that help out with her outfit. And then Peter Pan, of course, we have Tinkerbell, and Sleeping Beauty. We also have fairies. So further perpetuation of fairy and tooth fairy going on in the 1950s, but not without some backlash. This is a hilarious article called Fairy, Nothing But a Witch from 1956. And this father felt that kids were just involved in this tooth fairy business and that it was a money-making racket. So in the article, he says that fathers have been made the victims of the greatest fraud ever devised, and it amounts to putting out hard cash for teeth that are absolutely worthless. The first time this event occurs in the family, both parents agree that slipping the loot under the little tousled head and trying to retrieve the truth without waking the little rascal is going to be a great memory. But then, you have more kids and you realize how many teeth these kids have, and oh boy, are you in for just the worst ever. And I think it is funny with parents, the first tooth is fun, and then you've got to sort of keep this up. And if you have multiple kids, you've got to keep it up with the next one. So there was some backlash. And I can appreciate the dad's cynicism, because it's around this time that we start seeing merchandising of the tooth fairy start. We get the first tooth fairy books in the 1960s, and then we also get these specialty items. So this is a little pillow thing that has a pocket where you stick the tooth. And oh my gosh, if you don't have this, how's the tooth fairy ever going to find your tooth? Up till 2023, there's 874 tooth fairy books on Amazon currently, and 7 new tooth fairy books coming out in 2023. There's 3,000 items related to the tooth fairy on Amazon currently. Again, specialty items where you have tooth receipts. You've got special gold coins that are tooth fairy coins, all sorts of things to put the tooth in so that the tooth fairy gets it. And endless tooth fairy movies and just all sorts of things related to the tooth fairy. And then aside from the growth in consumer marketplace for the tooth fairy, we also see another change in parenting in more recent years. And this is the idea of intensive parenting, which was first described in the 1990s by social scientists. And the result was a more child-centered, expert-guided, emotionally absorbing, labor-intensive, and financially expensive period for parenting. The time parents spend in the presence of their children hasn't changed much, but parents today spend more of it doing hands-on childcare, so that today mothers spend nearly 5 hours a week compared with an hour a week in 1975 actually doing things with their children. And this, the photos here are perfect examples. This is a little girl who lost her teeth during COVID, and she was so worried that the tooth fairy was going to get COVID that she asked her mom to make a tooth fairy mask. And it's hilarious because this is on a news story. And so the mom tries to explain to her daughter that, oh, the tooth fairy's magic, she can't get COVID. And the kid insists, no, I think she could get COVID, Mom. And so then the mom talks about staying up all night, sewing this itty bitty little mask for the fairy. So it's just a perfect example of the lengths that we'll go to today to appease our children and to help that tooth fairy out. And I'll just end with the very last slide here that says, from now on, just take a picture of the tooth and upload it to my Facebook page. Then I'll send you the money from PayPal. I'll throw it back to you, Maggie, for questions, or if we want to talk about the intersection between these two characters a little more.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tammy. And I would encourage anyone who has a question for Tammy to drop it in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can before we're done. I just want to say a couple things first. Again, we are grateful to everyone who sponsored the bookworms, and our next one on January 20th, 2023 will highlight the Clements Library's newest exhibit, which opens on January 9th. It is an exhibit that was curated with an undergraduate class at the University of Michigan, a History 195 class, and it's on family secrets. The title of the exhibit is Uncovering Identity in 19th Century America. And the exhibit really addresses the theme of secrecy, how it's shaped our inquiry into the family as an institution and an ideal at the heart of conversations about American identity. So I would really, the class who curated this exhibit just did a really fantastic job. They actually met at the Clements every Monday and Wednesday all semester during fall 2022 and just did a really wonderful job. And I'd encourage you to stop by if you're able to come see it. And then once again, I just want to thank Dan and Barbara Baalbeck for sponsoring this episode of the Bookworm, and to suggest to any of you that if you're interested in sponsoring a future episode of the Bookworm so that we can continue to have these fascinating conversations, please let me or Anne know. And thanks to all of you for just being part of this today. We're really glad you're here. I would love to just get a few questions in, Tammy, before we let you go. And there's some really, really good ones in the Q&A. So we might start with this one from Tom Wagner. Was this purely a European phenomenon? What was happening in China and or India while Europeans were believing in toothworms? And I guess I would add on to that the same question. What about tooth fairies? Do we have equivalents to both toothworms and tooth fairies in Chinese or Southeast Asian culture?
So the first one's easy. The toothworm definitely in China, and unfortunately I had to cut some of my slides, but there is a whole legacy of toothworms in Southeast Asia as well. We don't have as many images from those periods, so they don't lend themselves as well to slides, but I should note that it is just as prevalent in the medical texts, and actually some of the oldest, when you get past that Babylonian tablet, the next oldest two recorded texts about the history of the toothworm are from China. So absolutely. I don't recall seeing any in India, but definitely parts of the Middle East for toothworms. In various other parts of the world. The tooth fairy, I showed that one map, and the tooth fairy and the tooth mouse are the most, I guess, common, I would say, the most populated nations have those, but there's a whole slew of other beliefs related to baby teeth. And a lot of them have to do with them being lucky or doing things with the tooth to make sure that your new teeth came in straight and healthy. So a little more thought out than the tooth fairy and the tooth worm. There's some countries that throw teeth on their roofs. Like that's another one that is in various cultures. It's really interesting. I did have to cut that slide, but there was another map I had that kind of showed all the variations and where they were. And it's super interesting. In particular, I'll just mention one more is South Africa, just because that's a country where there's so much convergence of different folklore and things. And they have a toothworm where you put the tooth into a slipper and you're left a coin from the tooth mouse. And that idea of the slipper has its own backstory. So yeah, good question.
Great question. Kristen Cabral also asks a really interesting one in the chat too. Can eating rotten food cause worms in your mouth and body? Thinking ye olden days before there's really good refrigeration, right? And I know at least in the 18th and 19th century, parasitic intestinal worms are a major source of concern. If you read any newspaper from the 18th or the 19th century, there are advertisements for worm powders or emetics so that you'll expel the worms in either direction. But I'm curious to know whether that did ever manifest in those little parasites in the mouth too, or did that rotten food just cause intestinal issues?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a medical background, but I mean, of course, I know that my dogs can get worms very easily from eating certain rotten food out or carcasses and things out in the wild. But as far as the tooth worm, yeah, I don't think I didn't read any evidence, where someone had a piece of food that was just like stuck in their mouth for that long. I mean, there's two, there's the worms that sort of get into your bloodstream one way, and then there's the worms you introduce to your digestive system another. And as far as having those living in your mouth, wow, that would be awful. I suppose it's possible, but I didn't read anything describing that, where you had a piece of cheese with maggots in it that just sort of lived in your mouth. I don't know. Have you come across anything, Maggie?
I haven't. No, that's why I was sort of interested to see. It's a great question. I mean, worms are thought to be the cause of everything, though, in the 18th and 19th century, whether it's just a bad mood or cancer or whatever else, you'll find doctors saying, oh, it's definitely worms, but
Right.
I don't know about the real ones. That might be kind of a fun follow-up.
I mean, again, teeth are pretty hard, so they'd have to make a life for themselves in your gums or flesh, I would think.
Yeah.
Moving
Makes
on.
you grateful for your kids. That
Yes.
is for sure. We have two kind of related questions. One from Stephanie is, how much is a tooth worth these days? Asking for all on behalf of all parents, really. And Tom Wagner also asks, is there any intrinsic value to extracted teeth, right? Tooth fairies kind of imply that baby teeth are valuable. So
yeah,
are they actually worth anything?
I'm so glad this is being brought up. So the American Dental Association, I don't know how often they do it, maybe every 5 or 10 years, they study the worth of the teeth through the tooth fairy. And currently it is between $2 and $3. That is the average. And of course, I know it varies widely, though, among different economic groups and different regions, but they do keep up on that. And, sometimes it can take a dip when there's a recession, and sometimes it can go back up. About the worth of baby teeth, we actually were just contacted a couple weeks ago by somebody who created an art installation out of milk teeth. And the purpose of the installation was to advocate for the study of stem cell research in baby teeth. So there's a lot of scientists who believe there is a lot of value in those teeth for stem cells. So I'm sure there's some people. Yeah, there we go. Someone already made a comment.
I was going to say, I was just reading an article about that and making sure that you hold on to baby teeth so that you can use them later on. And I'll just say too, and this would be something I'd love to hear more about from people in the chat, but I wonder whether the sentimental value around teeth still exists for parents. I know at the Clements, we have lots of things in the archive that are pieces of hair or little baby locks of hair, right? People definitely save biological remnants of their children in sort of like a sweet and sentimental way. And I think we do have a few teeth in the collections too. If there are any Clements curators on here who know which collections the teeth are in, let me know, because I can't quite remember. But Tammy, do you think that the sentimental value of holding on to that biological material has stayed the same or increased or decreased over time, and especially with the presence of the tooth fairy?
I think teeth are important, in that exhibit that we have up right now, Teeth Transformations. There was a lot of research done prior to my coming here just about the importance of teeth through history and different cultures, and so much of human history, teeth were used in making garments and in artistic displays. And so I don't know how that you could compare the two, but there's definitely more evidence in past cultures for using teeth. I think nowadays we think of it as kind of gross, and it's more so, again, outwardly using it. Not to say we aren't squirreling those teeth away, because I know a lot of parents are doing that. And again, teeth and hair, those are the things that last. You don't have to worry about them decomposing. So good question, though.
Anne Cassidy asks, people found the possibility of teeth worms frightening, which I still do, by the way. Did this have any effect on the repugnance they may have had in the use of leeches in treatment and healing? And I actually get this question when people find out I work on worms. They ask to what extent conversations about worms are affecting conversations about leeches and leeching in any way. And I don't have a great answer. So I'm wondering if you do. It's a great question.
Yeah. No, I really don't. But that's interesting because to me, some of the fear for a snake or anything that sort of wriggles is that it's quick and, similar to when you're scared of a mouse. It's like you're only scared of it when it's running by you and you don't know where it is. But leeches are so slow. So I don't know whether it's their their sliminess or their, but different people have different, different fears. But I did not come across anything related to leeches.
That's a great question. And I will say that's one of my favorite things about worms generally as a topic is once you start thinking about them, they're everywhere and their resonance is everywhere, even if you're thinking about leeches or maggots or snakes or little squiggly things that we take for granted in our life. But there's a lot of symbolism and I think resonance between them all. And that leads me to Linda Stratman's question. How do you think that dentists who developed fairy floss or cotton candy got the name? And was that related to the tooth fairy, which is kind of another fascinating little linkage that I haven't read anything about the connection.
No,
Certainly might
I
exist.
haven't either.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have not. That's an excellent idea.
It's sort of a charming little conclusion. Okay. There are a few other questions in here, but a lot of them are also just sort of asking for references. And I want to just reaffirm for everybody that you will get an email after the talk, probably sent out this afternoon with a link to the recording. A couple people have asked for your contact information, Tammy, so we'll be sure to tell people how to get in touch with you. And we'll also send a list of all of the resources and references that were used in this talk so that you can follow up with anything else that you'd like. Tammy, any final words before we log off here and say goodbye to the toothworms and fairies and I'll go brush our teeth frantically, which I think is going to be my first stop?
No, I appreciate everyone spending their Friday morning with me. And I just want to say that, Maggie, I'll send you some instructions too. Visiting the Sindecuse Museum of Dentistry is not impossible. It's a little bit tricky right now because our building still has some COVID restrictions, but we'll make sure that you have all the information in case you do want to come visit us.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good one. Happy Friday and happy holidays. We'll see you in 2023.